Hello, everybody. Today is just an exciting day for me. I'm getting to visit with Mark Lancaster. He and I have been chit chatting before. My name is Stu Turley, President and CEO of the Sandstone Group. This is the Energy News Beat podcast. And Mark is the with Broussard Energy. And I hope I said that right.
Broussard Energy. Otherwise, you'll have a whole bunch of coon asses yelling at you.
Anyway, well, Mark, thank you. And you also have a trademark that's pretty interesting. What's that trademark?
It's turning black gold green with crypto.
This is pretty, I think people can kind of get a glimpse of what we're going to start talking about here in a second, Mark. But you and you've been liking a lot of my stuff on LinkedIn, and I've seen your stuff for a long time. You and I have 360 shared connections, but I'm a peon in the world of LinkedIn. You have 26,000 connections, and I only have 2,000. So again, I'm not worthy to hang with you. And I am so excited to hear you about your experience and what you've going on. Mark, can you tell us a little bit of your background and how you got all of your knowledge? You still have your hair. I'm jealous.
It's part of it. I was told a long time ago that I know a little bit about a lot of stuff, and that makes me sound really smart, but nothing that I really know is anything that is original thought from me. But I was told that anytime you're repeating something from someone, the first 2 or 3 times you do it, you must give them credit, but then after that you don't. And so that's why I sound smarter, because I've just repeated so many times different people's stuff. I don't have them give them credit anymore, and makes it look like it's my original idea.
I'm taking a note on that because I'm going to be repeating everything you say. I'm going to watch this podcast 4 or 5 times. Does that count if I watch the podcast several times?
I don't know. But see, I got into the oil field working for my father-in-law. He had a system for compressing gas by taking a cylinder and putting it inside the structure of a pumping unit. And so then as the pumping unit would do its exercises going up and down, it would also draw the plunger up and down and allow you to be able to reduce the back pressure on a well by moving the gas off and pushing it into a pipeline. And thereby you can make more oil. So that's where I got into this. Then eventually I got into working at Baker Hughes doing power generation, because once again, taking natural gas, and instead of just selling it for $2 or $3 an MCF, converting it into something that's more valuable, which at that point in time was electricity. And so I've been doing that for the past few years, and recently working with a company in Florida called ProGen, where they have a great reciprocal generator that is everything a lot of other power generation isn't. But now as we've gotten into the crypto space, it's really just a perfect marriage with oil field, because it's 30 years ago, well, you and I are pretty old, so you remember when Jed shot that hill on the Beverly Hillbillies, and the oil started bubbling out of the ground. Well, nobody cared themselves with the gas that came along with it. They just collected the oil, and the gas just went wherever. Then back in the 90s, when Bill Clinton set up some of the Quad O's specifications for EPA, where you had to start gathering that gas.
Right.
Then it got to be where, okay, now we're going to have to take this waste stream and really gather it, or quite honestly, the oil, pretend we're gathering it, because it was never really all that efficient. So then that's where friends like Paul Gibbs and Extreme Tank Technology, they got to where they can gather it at a much more efficient nature, but then you even move to recent days, and and just gathering the gas is problematic, because in order to gather the gas, then you have to have a market for the gas.
Mhm.
And in order to have the market for the gas, you had to have a pipeline, where that you could actually, put it in the pipeline, let the pipeline send it to a gas plant, and where it would be used. And so companies started coming up with what they call virtual pipelines, which was basically you drill a well, you get gas, you put it into a tanker truck, and then you would truck the gas to a midstream or pipeline if there wasn't one close to you, which was still pretty expensive, and you
Mhm.
weren't getting full value for your money. But with crypto, the oil industry can now drill a well anywhere they want to,
Right.
regardless of whether there's a pipeline or not, simply because it doesn't matter. I mean, because they can, on that same location, now turn that gas into electricity that they can use on their site for drilling or whatever they want to, and eliminate using diesel. So they have a much cleaner site with less emissions, but then they can also take the rest of that electricity, convert it into crypto, and greatly increase their profitability,
Mhm.
uh, at the same time as being very environmentally green.
It's pretty funny. That is a great little system that you just talked about. Instead of flaring the gas, using the gas for electricity. And I'm just sitting there thinking, Liberty Frac has a whole electric fleet. You could probably run part of that off of that flared gas or not flared gas into those generators and run the electric frac fleet.
Well, that's what you would think, and that's what people, when I was at Baker Hughes, that's what they thought too. But the problem is, flared gas by its definition is not typically a long-term
Right.
deal. You
Okay.
might flare gas for 20, 30, 40 days, but in
Oh,
the regulatory nature, you're supposed to not flare it for a long period of time, so it's not sustainable.
okay.
And so that's where those virtual pipeline companies came along, because companies like Liberty Frac, US Well Service,
Yep.
they would go and want to do electric fracking, but they wouldn't have the gas supply from just the flare, so they would have to bring gas to them. And now all of a sudden, instead of it being extremely economical to electric frac, now they're getting where now hauling the gas in is just more expensive. I mean,
Mm.
it's still going to
So
be less expensive than diesel, and much better for the environment.
let's talk ROI though. For a Bitcoin mining solution coming off of the flaring gas, we were talking before the show, and that is a pipeline. Pipeline costs X number of dollars. What's the ROI features on this solution?
Well, a recent example I just had last week was a gentleman was wanting to drill a well. I guess it was close to Waco, Texas, and they're looking at drilling this well, and it was going to make about 100 MCF a day of gas. That was their expectation, as a vertical well, so it's not going to be all that prolific, and make 60, 80, 100 barrels of oil.
Right.
But because they are going to make 100 MCF a day of gas, they are going to have to do something with it.
Right.
And the typical way to do something with that would be to run a pipe to a pipeline, and that way you would sell the gas into the midstream. Well, the nearest pipeline is 4 miles away, and their cost to do all of that, getting the right of ways on the land, all they're looking at $800,000-$900,000. Well, 100 MCF of gas is going to gross maybe $150,000 a year in revenues.
Wow.
So if you're going to spend $1 million to make 150,000, that's not really great economics, So
No.
in these days and time, you can now drill that well,
Right.
take that 100 MCF of gas and turn it into Bitcoin, not even worry about the pipeline.
Right.
And instead of making $160,000 a year on selling that 100 MCF of gas, you
Right.
can make $1 million making it in Bitcoin.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. You said $1 million?
Yeah.
Let's see. I went to Oklahoma State, but I can even do that math. So that's pretty darn cool.
Yeah, I mean, and what happens is that for Bitcoin, it might cost $1.2 million for all the equipment and the
Right.
miners and the power generation and stuff. If you finance it, which is one of the things that we do, if you lease all that equipment, well, now you're leasing maybe $400,000 a year of equipment that you can write off, but you're grossing, you're netting 600,000 or 700,000 a year in profits. And
I call
it
that a good
really,
thing.
well, it to me, oil's over $90.
Right.
And there's going to be a lot of operators that have had permits that have been on the shelf that they didn't want to drill because they didn't want to spend the money to get the gas into a
Right.
pipeline. Well, now all they just come to us, and we basically turnkey the application where that now the oil company can have their own bit mine. We just had a phone call today from one of the, I don't know, big 6 oil companies.
Yep.
And they've got 6 locations that, it just makes so much sense, spelled CENTS, to do this, as opposed to try to deal with the environmental problems of flaring or venting or running new pipeline, et cetera.
This brings up an interesting question, and that is you talk about the folks that already have their leases that they have not drilled, but you still have regulations around that. How do you get your regulations solved?
Well, I mean, the main regulation you have is just usually an air permit,
Right.
and so air permit, like the biggest emitter of emissions is going to be however you're generating the power, be it using a turbine or using a recip generator or whatever.
Right.
And those technologies have been set up where that you can easily exceed whatever emission permit standards you have to hit. So that makes it really simple, and it becomes a very viable way to guarantee to the regulatory agencies that you're in compliance.
So you're saying 100 MCF on that well that you were doing. What's an average well that the big boys or even the small guys, because this sounds like something even the small guys could afford to really get into and have a decent ROI. What's the MCF that you would recommend for a Bitcoin mine to drop on one of your rigs in that solution?
I'm a salesman. So my answer to that is it depends.
Okay.
And it, like in reality, there are companies like EOG who is very basically putting a Bitcoin operation on every well they have.
Nice.
Be it 10 MCF of gas or 1,000 MCF of gas, simply because instead of selling gas for $4 or $5 an MCF,
right,
why not convert it into $30 or $40 worth of Bitcoin? I mean, there just makes no sense to sell something for a tenth of what you can sell it some other way. I mean, if you're going to go trade in your car, do you want to trade it in for somebody who's going to give you $1,000 for it, or are you going to go across the street and get rid of it for $30,000? I mean, which, how hard is that to make that choice? And the biggest problem right now in the oil industry is they don't have the knowledge or how it would work. And that's where we come in from a turnkey standpoint. We just do all the work for them, and we set it up, and it's pretty much automated.
So if let's just say that I'm an EMP, doesn't matter what size, 1 rig, 2 rigs, 3 rigs, and I'm starting to roll through this. And I need to find out the calculations, and I need to find a buy-in cost and then an ROI. I call Mark and say, here's all my stuff, and you can give me the numbers right there.
Yeah, you tell us the BTU content of your gas, you tell us the volume of your gas, and from there, I can do it. I've got these neat little calculators. They'll show you how much profit you're going to make.
And so the miners, I really had fun looking at your the ones that you were using for your turnkey. You just roll in a trailer. It's got all the servers in it. And it rocks and rolls.
Yeah, and it's just a computer, and it's not like um, it's not like it's doing anything than just sitting, just like these computers that we're sitting on now. It just sits there and runs.
Right.
And as long as it doesn't have any hiccups to it, where if it gets too hot or too cold or too sandy, or
Right.
the environment's a problem, it's just going to operate, and it's just going to create money, keep on making money, and so
What are some of the problems that you've seen with an EMP as you come into some of these pads? Just because sometimes, being in the field, there are problems, and you've got a good group of folks that work with you. Can you just tell us any kind of pain points that people have had as they put these in?
I think the biggest problem you run into is whatever the environment is that you're going to, be it like out here in West Texas.
Yep.
For example, in West Texas, because we're dusty, we've got a desert environment.
Yep.
You have to make sure that the air that's surrounding these bit miners stays clean of that dust. And so a new technology came out called immersion cooling, where now the miners, instead of just sitting on a rack in a container, they'll sit in a vessel of oil that's a special oil that, as the miner gets hot, that heat is absorbed by the oil, and then you pull the oil off and you take the heat out.
Kind of like a radiator.
Yeah, and this way it allows the miners to operate at a higher level of efficiency because they create more heat, but they're not going to be worried about getting dirt and stuff in them because they're more in an enclosed
in
environment.
Computers. I used to work for a small company, Intel, and dust and power and heat were the ones that, when you turn your servers on and off, that killed them. Your desktop up and down, killing them. So it was the electrical coming in and out. Heat and dust were the number 1 and 2 killers of PCs and servers.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you guys have already got those 2 killers nailed down.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on, because there's two ways you do miners. You either put them in an air cooled environment,
Right.
or you put them in an immersion environment. The immersion is, I guess, has really only come out in the last couple of years, but miners, for the most part, some of these big projects we work on, 100, 200 megawatt projects,
right.
They're just, you just set a row of containers out there, and you have guys walk up and down, and they take a look at them, and and even now with the software we'll look at them remotely and say, hey, miner 600 is having a little problem, go look at it.
Right. Now, what areas? We know the Permian. Do you do anything up in the Powder River, or anything over in the Haynesville, or up in the Appalachia area?
Yes. I mean, currently we're working on projects in the bayous of Louisiana.
Okay.
Out in the deserts of California, out in the mountains of North Dakota, out in the deserts of North Africa.
Right.
And
so you're doing North Africa too?
Yeah, we got one of our partners got projects in Sweden.
Nice.
So I mean there really is nowhere that you can't do Bitcoin mining.
Right.
It's always going to come back to power. I mean, because for example, last year China decided, well, we're not going to let any Bitcoin miners anymore. You guys get out of the country.
Right.
Okay, so they all started running to different places where they could find cheap power. A lot of them went to Kazakhstan.
Right.
Well, all of a sudden Kazakhstan had problems, and the government kicked them all out.
Right.
Well, now the Kazakhstan guys were going to go to Russia because that's where they had cheap power.
Right.
Well, you can't go to Russia no more.
I wouldn't want to go to Russia.
So now that's where everybody's coming back to the United States, and it's mainly because we have all of this natural gas that's available.
Wow.
We have a lot of natural gas that's stranded,
Right.
which is the biggie, because now, I mean, there's a lot of fields. You just think about it, the oil
Yep.
industry in the US is what, 100 years old?
Yep.
And so there's wells that were drilled 70, 80 years ago that are still operating, still
Right.
going well, but those wells probably never had a pipeline even came close to them. So they just
Right.
have gas that they're venting and have been venting for decades, and that's grandfathered in, and that's
Right.
good. Well, those types of fields can easily be
Converted. Up in Pennsylvania, in that area, I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were saying that there were so many really, really good wells, but just because of that point you brought up a little bit ago on that pipeline, they weren't able to even think about putting a rig on there or putting a well because the takeaway was not even there.
yeah,
And so
and
now this is a solution for anybody that's up in the Pennsylvania area. They can go after those wells that they couldn't have gone after before.
and another aspect of that is that one of the waste streams of Bitcoin mining is the heat that comes off of the power
Right.
generation.
Right.
Well, we can take that heat and eliminate another cost for an oil company, which is the produced water. For example, in
Hmm.
Pennsylvania, like when you drill a well and you produce water, you can't dispose of that water in the state of Pennsylvania. You have to truck it to Ohio or somewhere else
Right.
at a cost of $8 a barrel.
Ooh.
So, but by using the exhaust, when I was at Baker Hughes, we figured that off of one of our 30 megawatt turbines, we could evaporate 30,000 barrels of water a day.
Holy smokes. That's cool. Just cook your
And so,
water off and you're off and running.
well, and see, and then you can even wind up doing it where that you evaporate the water
Right.
and then you condense the steam back to pure water, and you can use that water for agriculture, hemp farm, I mean, there's
Boy.
so you can get into a lot of other things. It's not just eliminating the flare gas. You can make this
Wow.
a multiple aspect project.
And it
Yeah,
seems like um, I've always said that there's no ESG does not exist without accountability. And what, Mark, you're describing are measurable things that people can say, here's why we are turning oil to green, right? Or gold, turning black gold green,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And it's
yeah,
because of accountability in ESG, correct?
yeah.
Or am I
I
wrong?
mean, I mean, there's specific things that you can point to that say like, yeah, I invested in the oil well, but what are we're negatively impacting the environment.
Right.
We're taking all of our produced water and we're not just disposing of it down whole. We're taking that water for a sustainable garden. We're doing this for the agriculture.
Wow.
We're putting it into a greenhouse. We're doing, there are just so many different things that you can look at.
Right.
Once you turn, the whole key is turning the natural gas into electricity. Because once
Right.
you have it into electricity, you can do a bunch of things.
Yep.
And it's just like one of the biggest emission items in the world are oil tanks.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And like in Pennsylvania, they have all these oil storage tanks. Well, when Bill Clinton came along with Quad O back in the 90s and said, hey, you have to gather that gas,
Mm-hmm.
they really weren't all that concerned on how they did it. But now, through tools like you had on your show the other day with Paul Gibbs,
Yep.
you can gather gas right off the top layer of that oil. And now it's high BTU gas, and we can go and now pull that gas, run it in, and create electricity and turn it right into Bitcoin. So we can eliminate one of the biggest emission problems in the world.
Isn't that
That
crazy?
You know,
Um,
and people look at those tanks all the time and they go, oh well, they got a roof on them, so they're covered. Well, that's not the way it works.
No,
And I'm sure Paul.
and selfishly, Paul Gibb is absolutely a wonderful explanation on this whole thing. So fortunately, it's going to air this next Monday or Tuesday, and then you're going to air probably Wednesday or Thursday. So it's really going to be kind of fun that we recorded these, right after each other on this. And I love learning about those floating the
Bruce.
floats and everything else. And it was really exciting because I drove by Cushing. I know all those folks up there, and it was kind of like I didn't realize it was that much.
Well, and the most interesting thing, and I told you earlier, with Bitcoin mining, the whole goal is where can you get inexpensive fuel?
Right.
So that's why people looked at flare gas, because they're just burning it.
Right.
Then you look at stranded gas, it had nowhere to go. Well, the emissions off of a tank
Yep.
is free, because you're just giving that to God, and he doesn't really want it, so.
But it just dawned on me, as Mark, as you were pointing this out, is that a tank, those big cotton picking tanks sit there. They're being used all the time. So it's not just a matter of bringing it into a well that may or may not be shut off. You can have a more permanent, steady source of power sitting in one of those tanks. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, we made the math on it, and we're like a 60,000 barrel tank. Because what Paul was talking about was like, you have these oil pipelines all over the country.
Right.
Well, the oil pipeline has to be pressured up to like 1,000 pounds to push the fluid.
Yep.
About every 100 miles or so, you've got to have a place you can depressurize that line so that more fluid can be added so it can keep on going on the pipeline. Well, every time you depressurize the line, you exhaust gas.
Right.
And on a 60,000 barrel tank, that's 1,300 MCF of gas that goes to the atmosphere.
Over what period, Mark?
A day.
You could power a city off of that.
Huh?
You could power a small city out of that bad dog.
Yeah, but because there's no way that they're required to capture it. That's why Paul's technology is pretty cool, because he can just sit there underneath those roofs and just pull all that gas out. But then you get into the problem, just like with stranded gas on an oil well. Usually these tank farms are what? They're in remote locations. You don't normally have them right in the middle of a city. So now, great. Now Paul's technology allows you to capture the gas. What the hell are you going to do with it?
Right.
Well, you turn it into Bitcoin.
See, what a great a one-stop shop. They call Mark, they can get their numbers, they can get their ESG, they can get their accountability, they can get their solution. If it's a tank, you got contacts, and you can sit there and do the Sopranos and go, hey, I know people. So this is a one-stop shop, man. I love this. This is about as cool as it gets for the oil field.
Well, and like the oil field will not normally do anything unless it's economic.
Right.
That's the main thing. They're going to go wherever the economics are.
Right.
And when you can take 200 MCF of gas, and instead of getting a check for $350,000 at the end of the year, get one for over 2 million, that's economical.
Oh, you bet. Yeah. So that's nuts. So what do you see coming around the corner for, if I say this correct, Broussard Energy? How do you say that? Broussard
Energy.
What do you see coming around the corner there?
Well, there is a lot of new technologies, even where that we're looking at hydrogen. Simply because we have the capabilities of converting all of our recip generators that run on natural gas now. We can run them on hydrogen. So now, we get back to where I was talking about taking the exhaust from a power generator
Right.
and evaporating water. Well, once I evaporate the water and I turn it into steam and I condense the steam back to pure water,
You can
I can
use it
now
in a
use the
hydrogen plant.
electricity. Well, I can use electricity from the generator, do the electrolysis on the pure water, create
Yep.
hydrogen, and I can do all of that out of stranded or flared gas. And
That's almost a complete uh, ecosystem for power.
yeah.
That is weird. That is a complete. I need to have my graphics team do a graphic of this, because that is absolutely, you take the gas, you can turn it here, steam it, come around, make hydrogen, burn that. I mean, that's almost a self-sustaining fusion nuclear reactor. I mean,
Well,
that
I
is
mean that because the problem with evaporating produced water
right.
is most people don't want you to put it on the ground because they don't believe it's clean.
Right.
Well, that's fine. We don't want to. We don't have to convince them it's clean, because now we're just going to run it into another tank.
Yeah.
Do electrolysis, make hydrogen on it. Now we take the hydrogen. Now we can sell that to anybody we want to.
Now, here's another thought, because there are if I understand this correct me if I'm wrong, but you can run hydrogen through a natural gas line as long as the turbines are set up that way. Is that a fair, if I understand that, or?
Once again, I guess it depends. I don't know.
It depends.
I don't
like
know
that.
that answer. I don't know that.
If we're going to, I believe that there's a certain percentage of hydrogen that we can drop into natural gas, and that would be a way cool thing to pick a location that you had a takeaway that would support hydrogen and natural gas. Boy, I could see my head spinning on this bad dog.
And there are multiple companies that also do the same virtual pipeline where they'll transport the hydrogen. But for a company like an Amazon or all these companies wanting to run on hydrogen, the thing they look at is that typically, if you're going to create hydrogen, you use more electricity to create it than the electricity value that hydrogen can produce. So it always gets back into how cheaply you can make the electricity that you use for your process.
Right.
So by getting free water from an oil company, by taking their waste stream of produced water,
right,
and using excess electricity from their stranded gas that you created, you can do all that stuff, and then you can run some profits into Bitcoin at the same time.
I'll tell you what, I get so excited about this kind of a conversation, because it is turning all of a sudden. If everybody did this, Mark, we would not have the ESG problem or the bad name that the oil gas. Now, I'm going to be honest, the oil and gas companies did not for years do it right. Now they are. I mean, they are now getting into that area. And not all the countries in the world do things the way the US operators now do it. So, I mean, take a look at Russia and Saudi Arabia and all these others. They don't have the same rules and regulations, and some of them pretty darn pollutant, as we say in Texas, right?
Yeah, and so that's just where, like everybody, the oil field has always tried to be as environmentally conscious as possible, and when you take oil, which is an organic substance to begin with,
right?
People want to eat organically. Well, oil's it's as organic as it gets, and
turn dinosaurs into gold.
Well, it's just fertilizer that was just under compaction, turned into something else. But the problem happens is that when man messes with the organic oil too much, then they create H2S. They introduce other bad things to it.
Right.
And then through the process of pulling oil out of reservoirs that have brine water in there, everything starts mixing. And then you have the brine water comes to surface, and now it's the brine water. You know, when you see an oil spill, so to speak, on the
Right.
ground, the oil isn't what kills anything. It's going to be the brine water.
Oh,
I mean,
got
if
it.
you had, you know, like they've had that happen out here in West Texas where, you know, oil spilled on a cotton field, and
Right.
it was just clean oil. It had no H2S, no
Right.
salt water in it. You know, that became the farmer's best field. It's
No
just got
way.
all that natural fertilizer in it.
Well, do you remember just a little while ago when they had all the cargo ships in the bay in California, and one of the cargo ships drug an anchor
Yeah.
over a pipeline? Everybody flipped out, even though it did not put out that much oil. People heard oil leak and flipped out.
Yeah.
Because that's what everybody thinks, is that it is incredibly bad. I mean, the Exxon Valdez ruined it for everybody, but you sit back and take a look. I did not realize it was that portion of it that was hazardous.
Well, but even the Exxon Valdez, you know, like that's the best fishing land in the world right now, simply because all of that oil fell down to the bottom and the plants and plankton, and you know, wherever you have plankton, you're going to have little fish.
Right. And
Wherever you
whales.
have little fish, you get bigger fish, and wherever you
Right.
get bigger fish, you get bigger fish. You
Right.
know, so
This is so encouraging, because I have really enjoyed this. And Mark, we are going to have your LinkedIn information. We're going to have your websites. We're going to make sure that anybody can get a hold of you. And when we push this out, we're going to tag you. And we want people to find you with all this information, Mark. So
sweet.
again, you got the last word. Give us the last word to close us out here.
Well, you know, the oil field can be as green as it wants, you know, and when I speak green, you know, economically friendly, environmentally friendly, you know, and now through using things like Bitcoin, they can really be very viable. I mean, taking a small little small operator, and allowing them to reap the benefits of the new modern technology, I think is a pretty cool thing. So we work on projects like this all the time. And I'll throw one more thing, you know, because oil price has gotten up a lot,
Right.
you know, you now have more operators that want to drill oil. So
Right.
even in those operators, what they're having a problem with is they're making all this gas. Well, the gas plants are at capacity.
Right.
And there's never going to, you know, nobody's going to get more gas plants approved through Congress or whatever right now. So now you get into the same problem that you might have access to pipeline,
Right.
but the pipeline being full, you can't put more in there. But now you can take that stranded gas, that becomes stranded gas, and now you can sell it into Bitcoin and make a profit, and then you can create the oil and make the $100 a barrel oil, et cetera, et cetera. You know, I mean, so there's a lot of ways to skin that cat, you know, and by bringing Bitcoin into it, you just add, you know, 6 or 7 different more ways to do it.
Fantastic. And I can't wait, because I want to have a Bitcoin roundtable with you and Gary, and bring all that back in, because there's just a ton of, I just wrote down all these other questions. We're not done yet, Mark. Sorry.
Cool.
I'm gonna burn you up with another episode or two here. So again, thank you very much. And look forward to seeing you on the next one.
All right. Thank you. Howdy from West Texas.